The economic success and growing influence China has achieved under the leadership of the CPC is drawing domestic and worldwide attention. As the party celebrates its 97th founding anniversary, the international community is paying particular attention to see how China will chart its future course. What are the top priorities for the CPC in the coming years? How will the leadership frame their policy choices? And what are the implications for global policymakers in dealing with China? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Dr. Robert Lawrence Kuhn, chairman of the Kuhn Foundation and also the host of CGTN's Closer to China, as well as Mr. Liu Yawei, a senior fellow at Statecraft Institution. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Pan Deng. Gentlemen, the Communist Party of China started with less than 60 members from all around the country. Now, 97 years on, it's the world's largest political party with 89 million members, leading the world's largest population and the world's second largest economy. So I think it's time to look ahead a little bit and looking at the party's two centenary goals. The first mark is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the CPC at 2021, and the further one is at 2015 when People's Republic marking its 100th anniversary of founding. So looking ahead, what do you think is the major tasks at hand and most challenging ones, of course, Mr. Liu?
Of course, looking ahead for both the first centennial and the second centennial goal is to stabilize the economy, to sustain the economy. So for China, I think domestic affairs is still probably priority number one. But for the domestic issues to be stabilized, for the economy to be sustained, China also needs what it has been talking about, the strategic opportunity, 战略机遇区. But to maintain that, China will have to have good relationship, not only with the great powers such as the U.S., but also with neighboring countries. And of course, on that goal, there is also the unification of China. But I think that's less important. More importantly, is to reach the goal so that the economy is growing, people's living conditions will continue to improve.
What's your take on this, Dr. Kuhn?
Well, first of all, for the first centennial goal, it's the Shagang Shahui, the moderately prosperous society, which in the past was defined in purely quantitative economic terms as a doubling of the 2010 GDP per capita. That looks like it's being achieved with economic growth, but due to various circumstances, President Xi has talked about three big battles for the first centennial goal. Financial risk being the first one, with an increasing debt, particularly corporate debt and local government debt, but in addition some new innovations in society which cause uncertainty, whether it's fintech and internet technology, shadow banking, wealth management products, even real estate. These are the areas that could cause problems. So that's a major focus which China is looking at, financial risk. Secondly, anti-poverty, being sure that by 2021, in order to have a moderately prosperous society, President Xi has added a new element. It's not just a quantitative test of average GDP per capita for the whole country, because you could have the eastern coastal regions very, very high and the poor regions low and still have a very good average and meet that goal. But he's added the new criterion that China cannot claim to be a moderately prosperous society if any Chinese citizen is living below the line of extreme poverty. So that becomes a really critical test. And the third big battle is anti-pollution. But the core test is now focused on anti-poverty, and it's really a fascinating project to look at, to see how that campaign is operating, how the CPC operates and its capacity, and what the implications are for China.
And I know that recently you've been traveling around inland China to cover topics surrounding anti-poverty and poverty alleviation campaign. What do you make of the progress so far?
Well, if you look at it quantitatively, it's obviously progressing. If you look at the totality of anti-poverty in China, and this is one of the certainly claims of legitimacy of the party, that it has brought pick your number, but it's roughly 700 million people out of poverty. Well, the first 600 million or so out of poverty was not any directed effort because it was just purely economic growth. Economic growth of the whole country since the beginning of reform and opening up and the end of 1978, and this whole period of time, now this is the 40th year of it, has brought, rising tide lifts all boats. But what happened is that there were about 100 million people that no matter how much the country developed economically as a whole, there were about 100 million, order of magnitude, that wouldn't be affected. The rising tide would not lift their boats because they were in rural areas, minorities, poor education, not the same language, all different kinds of issues. And so the party under President Xi has made a target poverty alleviation program for the last 4 or 5 years. And every year it's been whittling down, and there are multiple mechanisms that they're using, creating micro-industries, relocation, remarkably moving whole villages to urban areas and then getting them jobs, education, what they call eco-compensation. People living in beautiful areas are paid in order to make industry that are ecologically friendly. And then, of course, the people who are infirm, who can't work, you have to have Social Security. So 5 methods. But what's really interesting is how it works, because there are 5 levels of party organization that is structured to do this. Provincial and party secretary it's their prime responsibility. Provincial level, municipal level, county level, township level, village level. This hierarchy of party secretaries has an absolute mandate to affect poverty alleviation. I was just with several in the last few days, and they tell me that 60 or 70% of the time they're spending, now this is in a poor area, granted, in Luliang in Shanxi. Right. And so in that city, almost 4 million people, they at one point had 500,000, very large number. But the focus of the party secretary's time is on poverty alleviation, and then it goes down to each level. So you see the party organization and what it's doing in that respect, and it's a very, very powerful one. China has many other problems. We can spend many hours talking about it, but poverty alleviation is an important way, and it's an important window to see into how China operates.
And this is also about one of the core values of socialism, right, Mr. Liu, equality.
Equality, obviously, it is a core value of the socialism. But I don't think it's just the core value of socialism. It's a core value of all political system, in most of the Western countries, and in the U.S., in Western Europe, and other countries.
But not too many political systems can reach equality for most of the people, right?
Well, I don't think it's only fair to say that China is the only government that is dealing with the issue of equality. All government tries very hard, and as Robert suggests, China probably the impact is bigger because China has a way of organizing and marshaling its resources. China's party secretaries are on location, monitoring the progress of where political systems are different, for example, in India and in other countries. So maybe the impact or the result is less impressive as it is in China, but that doesn't mean other countries are not pursuing the idea of equality.
Yes, Dr.
I think we have to differentiate between what China does to lift people out of extreme poverty, which President Xi has focused on, which is very laudatory, and the concept of equality. I think I absolutely agree that socialism, just as socialism has said that capitalism does not have a claim to a market economy by itself. Indeed, socialism doesn't have a claim to equality. Equality is the founding principle in the U.S., for example. And if you look at the statistics, China is one of the most unequal countries. The fact that they're bringing people out of poverty just above the poverty, and remarkable achievement, that doesn't eliminate the inequality. Inequality in China is one of the biggest problems.
And now it's
a
time
natural
to balance this gap.
It's a natural result of the economic development. So you're dealing with natural economic principles. But I don't think it is fair to say that that's something special for socialism versus what occurs in other kinds of countries. I think what China can achieve because of the party organization for poor people is unique. And that's a very special thing. But it's important to understand it so we don't generalize beyond which the facts dictate.
Right, so what about China's economy? We know that this year also marks the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up policy. And in recent days, especially within this year, China has released many measures to easing market access and allow foreign investment into many sectors which used to be seen as sensitive sectors. What do you make of this move, Mr.
No, I think Robert already in his opening remarks talked about the economic challenges the country is facing. He talked about the housing bubble, talking about the financial sector health, and also recent devaluation of the Chinese currency, and with the impending trade friction with the United States. So I think the Chinese economy, while it continues to grow at a healthy rate, but it does face a lot of uncertain and unpredictable prospect. And talking about this at the 40th anniversary, because in the last 40 years, particularly the first 35 years, the economic growth is breathtaking. But it has slowed down because breathtaking speed is not normal. The new normal is going to slow down, but
it's more about quality right now.
I'm not sure it's all about the quality. The housing market, I don't think there is any. There is the quality of those who can afford to buy, but there is no quality to talk about, because here in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Shenzhen, the majority of the people probably cannot afford to buy housing. And this financial, I don't know much about the market, but what I read is China is trying very hard to avoid a financial tsunami, which happened in 2008 in the U.S. and spread to the whole world.
The financial opening up in China is something that China needs. It's not doing it because it's being pressured by the U.S., although it is good to open markets to the world, which demonstrates China's approach to openness, and China's promoting globalization, so to make it consistent. But China's not doing it for external pressure. China's doing it because it helps its own markets. Because as China's markets develop, and if the financial sector is one, other sectors, autos, etc., where they're easing the restrictions in the past, because foreign competition is actually helpful. When you bring in foreign competition, it raises the standard so that Chinese institutions don't get lazy and have to continue to improve. In some sectors, there are numerous Chinese enterprises, like in motor vehicles, and that's inefficient because each province has its own protectionism, if you will, that they all want to protect jobs in their own areas. You understand why, but as a result, you have an inefficient industry. So by allowing more competition at a time when China can't, if you did it too early, then the foreign competition would overwhelm China. So China did not want to do that as a developing country, understandably. But as it develops further, in order to get to the next level and to get to world-class levels, because China wants to be a leading nation in the world. They want Shanghai to be a world-leading city, maybe the world-leading city in future decades in terms of economic development. To achieve that, you need world-leading industries, and you're not going to do that if you allow this protectionism to occur in China. So by allowing foreign competition into certain sectors at the right time, it forces Chinese industry to up their game and to become even better, and to force them, have market forces encourage mergers and acquisitions so that entities become more efficient. So it's a very careful calibration to improve Chinese industries, which is part of the plan.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll be continuing this after a short break. You're watching Dialogue on CGTN. Stay with us. Gentlemen, General Secretary Xi Jinping has been emphasizing the importance of party building for the party's sustainable and health development in the future. So, talking about party building, what do you make of China's anti-corruption efforts so far, Mr. Liu?
I think China's way of fighting corruption is probably very unique, as most of other things are also quite unique in China. Just the numbers, last night when I received questions from you, you have a very impressive numbers of party officials being taken down in the past 6 years. I think at the right after the 18th Party Congress, when this unprecedented anti-drug graft, anti-corruption campaign started, I remember Wang Qishan, who now is the vice chair of the country, said, because the country at that point was in such critical situation, we need to deal with the syndrome. We need to cure the illness at this point. It's like, you have a heart attack. We need to give you emergency treatment so that we can rescue you, save your life. But I think
and you have to deal with the root causes.
The bigger challenge is the root causes. So the party building, maybe it's about the root causes, the intra-party democratization, financial disclosure. Not that China doesn't have financial disclosure, is that the financial disclosure China has today probably has no teeth, because it's an internal thing. It's not accessible by the media. And the Chinese way of fighting corruption, I think, because there's the party.
But the teeth is with institution building. For example, the newly established National Supervisory Commission is supposed to do that job on a wider scale, right?
I think it's just adding a layer to what is already in existence, and there are better institution building. Probably, I'm not saying this is not good, but again, we don't know how this is going to work. What is the difference between this new institution and the Party Discipline Inspection Committee and other organs in the government and in the party that are fighting this? I think there are probably more party building measures that should be taken into consideration so that the root causes can be better addressed.
What's your take on this, Dr. Kuhn?
The new financial supervision, the National Supervision Commission is an expansion of the discipline commission in the party to all of society, basically the government, and take some of the same principles. But we have to look at the overview of this. Many reports, of course, in the West look at the anti-corruption campaign from a kind of a very narrow scope in terms of political struggle and various things like that. I think one of the mistakes is that when people look at China in the West, not knowing it, they like to find one reason for things, and almost always there are multiple reasons and a great many reasons. And certainly the anti-corruption campaign is such. With strengthening the party obviously had a very poor reputation because of corruption. All political systems have trade-offs. I mean, that's just, there's no perfect political system in any way. And with all that the party has been doing, when you have a one-party system that is not subject to continual testing through an election process, and you have a controlled media, and you have the great creation of wealth, that's sort of a petri dish for the creation of corruption. And so by attacking it through the party system, President Xi has restored this legitimacy to the party, maintaining its good things and trying to deal with this issue. It's a complicated subject to do that. For example, of the roughly, I think, 150-odd thousand cases last year of officials being taken down for or punished for corruption, almost about a quarter of them, 25%, I think 40-some-odd thousand, had to do with the anti-poverty campaign. So money was being flowed to the area, and 45,000 cases, those are the ones reported, who knows how many were not reported, funds were being diverted. And this is a very serious issue, and I've looked at that, how China's dealing with that. The best thing about it is that it was disclosed. It was a public disclosure, which I think speaks to what you were saying, and that what China needs to do. It needs to have more transparency. The more transparency it has, the more it will be able to sustain the anti-corruption campaign and be able to maintain its legitimacy. So the transparency in anti-corruption is a critical area and needs to continue.
And talking about party building, recently General Secretary Xi Jinping also encourages the party to promote young cadres and talents. Why this is so important, Mr.
Well, this is important because the older you get, the more comfortable you feel, and you probably become more bureaucratic, and you do need young blood. You need people who are more innovative, and this is not new. I remember when I was just started working back in the early 1980s. There's suppose the so-called third tier. I was interviewed, because I was young, and there are lots of people, I think, in the 80s, in the 90s, who were promoted at a very young age. Maybe President Xi raised this is because this was forgotten. In the last decade or so, we have older leaders at all levels, so maybe there should be special attention and emphasis on promoting young and talented. Because the Chinese way of selection is different from Western way of selection, or more open society. You can run. There's no age restriction. French president, Trudeau in Canada, they don't have to go through layers, at each level. There are five layers of government. You won't be able to start at the village level and go all the way to the provincial level. So I think we'll have to see how innovative this is going to be and whether this is going to be sustained. And I think, again, the selection process, as Robert said, transparency, competitiveness, accountability, these are very important measures that should also be put in place before you're going to promote young leaders into key positions.
So what do you make of the CPC's governing style, Dr. Kuhn? Some observers are saying it's a kind of selection plus election and meritocracy plus hierarchy. Do you agree?
Well, it's hard to give a yes or no answer to a question like that. That's more a course than a comment. If we look at we talk about the CPC, Communist Party of China, as a party, a political party, and I think in communicating what China does and has, that's actually a misnomer. I mean, you have to use some word, I guess that's the word people use, but it really doesn't describe what the governance structure is in China. The party, the CPC, is more like a governance sector that's meritocratically, is supposed to be meritocratically based. And it has elements of a political party for sure. It's now at 89 million members. That's larger than, I think, the top 15 countries in the world if it were a separate country. And it has elements of the traditional China imperial bureaucratic system with examinations, etc., to get the very highest quality civil servants. So you have elements. Has Chinese characteristics to it for sure. And because it is, though, a one-party system, without the kinds of transparencies in the media, etc., it allows certain kinds of human sociological activities to occur. We talked about corruption. That is a natural result. China does not have a monopoly on corruption, as we all know, but nonetheless it leads to that more so. It also leads to a more strict seniority system because people control. There's no external checks and balances to control that. So with this new regulation, this new directive to promote younger individuals is a disruption, because it's going to disrupt a normal hierarchy of development that people have put in place because of the internal mechanism of the system. And in order for innovation, for example, to be the most important thing to drive China's economy, it's the first of what President Xi has called the 5 major development concepts, or new concepts of development: innovation, coordination, green, open, and sharing. But innovation is #1. So how can you have innovation if you have a strict hierarchical system based on seniority as opposed to being based on meritocracy? I see this in the science industries, in the science sector in China, where China is promoting science. And how you do that, if you stick with a strict seniority plan, you're not going to have the best scientists being created and have the best resources. So you have to have different kinds of system. So this type of disruption, which is a very positive term when you think of it from an economic. When economists talk about disrupting industries and disruption, it's really to break through to a new level. So this approach of disrupting by encouraging the promotion of younger officials, disrupting the old seniority system, is both innovative and important for China to go the next step. But it's going to also cause some internal, shall we say, consternation among those individuals whose seniority will be interrupted by the promotion of younger officials.
So we've talked about the CPC's main tasks ahead and also some tough challenges. And the 19th CPC National Congress has announced that China has entered a new era of development, and the Xi Jinping thought socialism with Chinese characteristics in a new era is the guiding thought in this particular period of history. What do you view its role in China's future development, Mr. Lee?
Well, I think we already discussed this. Is the paramount goal for China is first, of course, 2021, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the party, and 2049, the 100th anniversary of the founding of PRC. So, we have, this is all, as Robert said, this is all quantified. You have numbers you have to accomplish. So I think that's the goal. The challenge is how you're going to reach that goal.
But the thought is not only about goals, it's about providing a guiding ideology in China's development ahead. Well, yes, Dr. Kim.
I would frame it with as we said, with the two goals as benchmarks. So it's 2020 or 2021, 2049, 2050, and now we have the new one in 2035 in the middle where this will be basically accomplished. So that's one framework. The other framework are the key topics, and I would look at four as composing Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. The first is people orientation. And that is the guiding theory that everything that's being done is for the benefit of the people. The exemplification of that, of course, is the anti-poverty campaign, but it's much broader than that. There's this so-called new principle contradiction, which also came out of the 19th Party Congress, which is a kind of a Marxist term that looks at what's the most important problem in society, how do you deal with it, and the transformation was from the past 30 years where the differences were because what people needed and the productive forces to give was just purely getting them more stuff and more goods. That has changed to where there's an imbalance between what it takes to have a better life. And so you can have as many cars and refrigerators as you have, but if the air you breathe is polluted, you don't have a better life. If you have to wait in line for 5 hours at a hospital to get something, medical attention, you don't have a better life. So China is more looking for people orientation, getting people out of poverty, and giving people a better life, defined more qualitatively than quantitatively in the past. So that's number one. Number two is what I call national rejuvenation, building the pride and stature of China in the world. As has been said, Mao made China stand up, and Deng made China rich, and now under Xi, China is becoming strong. It's a nice Chinese phrase that says that. That's the third. That's the second. The third is the primacy of the party. The party is now elevated in terms of its responsibility in not just guiding society and guiding the government, but in fact running the government in many very specific ongoing ways, not dual behind the scenes, but so the party is right out front, really running it, this meritocratic sector of society. And then the fourth category I would have is international, and I think what we said before is correct, that China needs an international environment of peace in order to have its own.
So what do you make of CPC's communication with the outside world in recent years? For example, in recent years, the CPC has been hosting this CPC in dialogue with the world political parties and trying to build more communication and introduce CPC's experience and provide better understanding for outside world on China. What do you make of these efforts?
I think it's very important. I think transparency and openness is great in terms of what the party does and in the dialogue where the party is interacting with others. The more you do that, the better. It used to be the party only dealt with other communist parties in Cuba, North Korea, Vietnam. I don't know if there are any more now left in the world, but that's not right. China's party is a political party leading the country. It should interact with all political parties. So I think that's good. I think what China needs to be more sensitive to, that it needs that sometimes things it does that it thinks is doing to promote China's image in a positive way has the opposite effect. When it looks like it's trying to manipulate or to change an opinion or force people to have different opinions, a very small thing that in that way can undo a lot of good work. So China has to be more open and transparent in what it does, and the communication of the party is great. But it also needs to be sensitive that any effort to manipulate or apparently to be too open in that respect, in terms of communication, can have a serious negative impact and undo a lot of good.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your input. And that's it for this edition of Dialogue on CGTN. I'm Deng in Beijing. Bye-bye.